Thank you very much. This is incredible. We've just, we've started for the year today, and we've had so many people reach out to us. We've had so many people ask us questions, and I love that. For those of you who don't know me or who haven't worked with me, I've been running the nutrition clinic for 12 years this year. I'm trained as a biochemist originally, and I became interested in functional medicine through a series of health-related issues. Health-related issues got me curious about my own body, my own health. I was having difficulty conceiving. I was told that I would need IVF, and at the age of 35, I made the decision to not pursue that and to really work on my own health. I wasn't feeling my best, and so I knew something wasn't working right. At that time, this material wasn't online. I ordered books from the UK and the US, and I studied. I quit my job. I said, my mom is in this group, and she's kind of seen all this firsthand. I basically changed my diet. I removed chemical toxins. I discovered I was gluten sensitive. I was drinking water from one of those big plastic bottles, those big containers that you have at home for hot and cold water. And I thought it was a great idea till I learned all about BPA and the effect it has on hormones. And I just systematically got rid of all of these and changed my lifestyle. It wasn't just diet, it was lifestyle as well. I got pregnant at the age of 38, and I have a 14-year-old daughter. By the time I got pregnant, I felt healthier than I had done even a decade earlier. And so I knew that something had shifted fundamentally in my body. And I've been, for me, that was proof of principle. I know that my hormones obviously shifted, my gut shifted, my whole body, the hormonal system shifted. And then I took that information, created the nutrition clinic. And over the years, we've been working with clients in a number of different spaces. And this year, I've kind of gone back to my original, I guess, the source of the passion that this business was based on. And we've decided to direct the business more into the space of female hormones. Partly that's just going back to what matters to me. Right now, I'm dealing with peri-menopause. And so it's a different relook at my own system. And I'm doing this with a different level of knowledge than I had 14, 15 years ago. And so that's what I want to bring to the table for women. So our first open office which we do every Wednesday, our first one is all about hormones, because that's the space we're going to get into. And as we kind of unpack this, you will learn. I've had a lot of questions around gut health, and it's all connected. The body is a series of connections and networks and systems. And I think if you leave with one thing today, which is just getting a sense of where your own network may be working well or where it might be stuck, that will be great, because I think just knowing that and starting to make those connections is the first step towards healing. There isn't a magic bullet. There isn't a supplement that's going to change everything, but there are a series of steps that can be taken that can be extremely powerful. So let me jump right in. I'm going to share my screen. So as we do every time we do this, I'll go through just a short set of slides. And the idea is that I've just curated some information to direct today's hour that we have together. But this is really your time. So by all means, think of questions. If there's something really urgent, just put up your hand through this, and I like this to be as interactive as we can make it. So I'm going to get started, but this is your time and your stage as well. So today, let's talk about what is hormonal drama. How do you say goodbye? First, I think you say hello to your hormones, and then you say goodbye to the drama. So let me just change the view. All right. All right, so today we will cover just understanding your hormones at every stage, uncovering the 5 root causes of hormonal imbalance, and what you can do right away. I always like to leave anybody who attends my talks and workshops will always be left with something that they can do today, something that should be something that you think about, some knowledge that goes deeper, and a sense of optimism about what is available to look after yourself at whatever stage you're at. Okay, so let's just have this kind of visual of hormonal stages, right? So Everybody's familiar, all women are familiar with this. And honestly, I think men need to be familiar with this as well. So this is, I think as I'm learning more and more about the female hormonal space, I'm also learning just about how unfair the world is, the amount of medical data and research that's skewed to the male system rather than the female system is astonishing. Symptoms are, women just have a lot more symptoms, a lot more complicated body system, but even something as simple as the colon, right? The digestive system. A female digestive system is, the colon is longer. The women are more prone to something like constipation. Nobody likes to talk about it, but women are more prone to constipation than men because of our digestive system, because of our microbiome, because of our gut flora, and because of stress, which we respond to differently, right? So we have to just be, I think, just really direct and upfront about the fact that there are differences. And I think we need to not shy away from that topic, only then can we get into the root of the issue. So what I see in my practice and what I've seen over the last decade and a half is, period starts, interestingly, periods are, the start of the hormonal cycle is getting younger and younger. So it used to be 12, 14, sometimes even 16. Now it's more like 10, 12. In itself, that is that there is always the space for differences. There's not always the absolute right, but I think we just need to be aware that with puberty, there is a hormonal shift, and that hormonal shift has an impact on the body. And when is the body ready for that? What I see is obviously mood swings, acne, low iron. These are fairly typical issues that young girls face. I have a 14-year-old, so we're dealing with, we're here and we're here in our household. So I do feel a bit bad for my husband right now. What I hear about the kind of chatter that young girls have is that, oh, it's all okay, right? There's no problem as long as, nobody wants to talk about it and there's no problem. But I think it's actually really important for young girls to start understanding what all of this means just from a body, looking after one's body. Because very soon we see women reach the stage of more serious hormonal imbalances, and PCOS is something that I'm seeing a lot of. PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is really a blood sugar insulin issue, and that's connected to this. I'm seeing a lot of younger girls, younger women dealing with thyroid issues. Even I have some students in school who are dealing with autoimmune thyroid issues. Obviously, there is a greater, the rate of fertility is lower. That has been impacted by the way we live. And iron continues to be an issue through this time. For those of who are dealing with the thyroid issue, it's important to know that your thyroid is almost always linked to stress, and your thyroid is also almost linked to gluten. So if anybody dealing with a thyroid issue, gluten should be the first thing you're just paying notice to and looking at whether it is working for you or not. Post-fertility, there is the post-pregnancy stage where hormones are obviously trying to get back into balance. There can be nutrient depletion, blood sugar imbalance. There is a window after pregnancy when women are more prone to autoimmune conditions, especially thyroid-related conditions. So that's something that I think women need to be aware of and get some tests on. Burnout, women are just doing a lot more work, family. I see many women as the glue of the family, and often it takes a toll on the individual, leading to low energy. And again, low iron is something that I see fairly consistently in at least the kind of this stage of a hormonal cycle. As our periods go down, they reduce in length as well as intensity, that becomes less of an issue. But then we have the issues of weight gain, fibroids, mood issues, anxiety, osteoporosis, low energy, and that can continue through to menopause. I think perimenopause is a space I'm personally very interested in. What's interesting is that it can start in your early 40s, for some women even earlier. And most women don't think in terms of menopause because we think of it in our 50s and above, maybe mid 50s and above. A lot of these patterns are influenced by your environment, but they're also influenced by genetics. So it is important to know when your mom and even your grandmother had her her perimenopause, because I think that does play a role, and I think it's just an important piece of information. The way I look at perimenopause is it's a time when whatever else your body has been able to cope with comes to the surface. It's a time, it's like a mirror. If stress has been an issue that has been manageable through just pushing yourself, in perimenopause, you might find that it is not as easy to manage. The body just seems to say, okay, enough is enough. These symptoms are rising to the surface. Let's just, as I said, so there is early perimenopause, which starts in mid-40s. Then there's late perimenopause. Average age of menopause is 51. There is there's postmenopause and then late postmenopause. The definition of menopause is when you've gone 12 months without a period, and perimenopause can last 8 to 10 years. So it's not a short time, and it is multifactorial. So there might be different symptoms at different times. One of the biggest issue with the symptoms that come up in perimenopause, and there's a lot of jokes about it, right? Hot flashes and moodiness and anxiety, not being able to sleep. But the biggest thing that changes is, and I think this is really important to know, that we have from puberty onwards, we have two major female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And think of them like dance partners. They work together every month. They create the period. They are obviously involved in fertility. But what happens in perimenopause is progesterone typically goes down very, very quickly. Estrogen doesn't go down. It's kind of lost its dance partner. It's just hanging around. It often goes up and down. And estrogen on its own can be a troublemaker. It causes growth. So women in perimenopause need to be just aware of fibroids and cysts, need to be aware of growths in every sense, but also need to make sure that their body is able to handle this extra estrogen, which really comes to how well do you detoxify. And we should make sure we don't get extra estrogen. Our body's producing some as part of its natural process, but we are exposed to a lot of estrogen that's artificial. These are called xenoestrogens, things like that plastic, the BPA in the water that I was consuming many years ago, or pesticides or hormones that are added to food. This is a time to really start paying attention to this levels. And this whole thing is called estrogen dominance. Any of you who are on TikTok might have heard of this, but there is this carrot salad craze on TikTok, some 8 million views. It's a good step. Women are saying if they have a bowl of carrot salad a day, their estrogen dominance gets better. Nothing wrong with a carrot salad. Honestly, it's great. But what's interesting to me is this whole idea that the body will just shift with one change. So, if you're doing a carrot salad and that's one step that makes you take a few more steps that are in the right direction, I can see its power, but it's not the magic of the carrot salad. It is the magic of fiber, of getting nutrients in. And in fact, the vegetables that we really believe are powerhouses when it comes to clearing estrogen is this family of vegetables called cruciferous vegetables. So that's broccoli sprouts, radish sprouts, cabbage, kailan, kale. They are really, really good at just dragging this estrogen out of the body. And they have been studied. There is data that shows that they do help with the prevention of breast cancer. So that's been studied quite extensively. All right, so let me just talk a little bit about how do we approach this when somebody comes to me and says, I have endometriosis, I have a thyroid issue, I have a gut issue, or I'm dealing with perimenopause symptoms. This is the way I look at the world and the body, right? So I like to divide the body into 3 systems. This is the gut health, and it's obviously influenced by what you're eating. This is stress and sleep, and this is detoxification. Right in the center of this are hormones. Hormones are involved in pretty much every message that's sent in the body. They are messengers that are sent in the body. Very obviously, whatever's happening in the gut health will affect digestive symptoms. So if anybody's dealing with bloating reflux, very immediately they think about what's happening in the gut. But people who are dealing with skin issues are also dealing with a gut issue. People who are dealing with anxiety may also be dealing with a gut issue. And similarly with PCOS and blood sugar issues. Again, with sleep and stress, we all relate that to feeling tired, having low immunity, having anxiety, having poor sleep obviously will feed on itself and create can create chronic insomnia for some people. And that can cause not just that, but it is involved in autoimmunity. It is involved in how you perceive pain. It is involved even in things like high cholesterol and blood sugar. So people who do shift work, who are up late at night, or who have irregular sleeping habits, definitely have a higher incidence of blood sugar issues. They also have a higher incidence of cancer, breast cancer, hormonal cancers. And you can see how it's all connected, because if you don't sleep well, your gut's going to be affected. If your gut's affected, your detox is affected. And when I speak of detoxification, I don't believe in a juice cleanse. There's nothing wrong with juice or vegetable juices. They're a great thing to have, but you don't buy detox in a box. Detoxification is something that your body does all the time. And it's very, very well designed to do that. All we need to do is to make sure the body has what it needs and to get out of the way by pulling out things that are getting in the way. Detoxification becomes very, very important when we're talking about hormones, particularly in the perimenopause years when we might be dealing with is estrogen dominance. But it's also important in endometriosis, which may happen at a younger age, or fibroids, which may happen at a younger age. Also important for some of these issues like eczema, allergies, chemical sensitivities. When I work with clients, I recognize that there's a lot of connections and it can feel overwhelming. And when in my training in functional medicine, I have to say that was one of the things that I found personally quite frustrating, because everything links to another thing, which links to another thing. How do I take that level of information and make sense of it without having people work with me for years? Because honestly, we all need a start and an end. We all have other things to do. And that's been a driving force at the nutrition clinic. We do believe that we want to take this information, make it available, but also make it practical, make it affordable, make it doable, because nobody wants to feel like they're constantly on a plan. I don't like that feeling, and I don't think anybody should be on that. And so this is what we've put together. We start by obviously getting to know the person. So I always start with a 1-hour appointment with the person. I'm doing that on Zoom or face-to-face. They both work very well. I have access to some really interesting testing that can show what's going on in the gut microbiome, that can show what food sensitivities you have, what deficiencies you have, how well do you detoxify, how well does your body produce your stress hormones and recover from those stress hormones. So all of that can be assessed and analyzed. I always start with food. We are the nutrition clinic. We do believe food is the most powerful form of medicine, but we also believe that food alone isn't the start and the end. It is really important to focus on stress and sleep. And so, we focus on food, then we get into stress and sleep habits and patterns. We look at what's going on in the gut. We look at how to detoxify a person's body. And this is all based on the information we get from them through the tests. What's interesting is we don't even start dealing with metabolism or hormonal balance till this work is done. And this is, I think of this like climbing a mountain. This is the mountain you want to climb. The tests are a map, right? So that's giving you a map on how to get up the mountain, but the map will tell us, okay, this is an area of, a slippery slope. You need to be careful here. Or this is an area that's really clear. You can breeze through this. But all of this sits right at the end of that, because anybody who gives you a hormone balancing diet first off in your first engagement, who hasn't considered this, without meaning to sound judgmental of other practitioners, I don't think that's the way to do it. I don't think there is a metabolism boosting diet or a hormone balancing diet. There are practices and principles that are absolutely powerful. We get those done right at the start, but I think the real magic is when you actually look at all these systems and you balance these systems out. The same information is kind of explained in this way, where if I look at the blocks of how I divide the body, the digestive system, the neuroendocrine, which means the brain and the hormonal system, stress and sleep comes under this, and detoxification. Hormones sit here, but they're connected to everything over here. And I just want that visual to stay with you, that this is how we can connect several of the dots that may be affecting you. Okay, so what can one just start off with? Because I know this is involved. I know this has a level of depth to it. But if I had to say, what can you do today and what could be good for almost every stage of life today? I'm going to start, as always, by looking at the plate, right? So a few patterns and trends that I see. come under these three categories. One is, are you eating enough protein? Women tend to not eat enough protein. In general, when I've worked with clients, I see that when women say, yes, I eat protein, it tends to be much smaller than the level of carbohydrates. Women tend to gravitate more to carbohydrates. And I think women also have this idea that as they grow older, we need less protein, but actually that is the time we need more protein. We need extra protein when we are recovering from an injury, recovering from an accident, during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and in the menopause and postmenopausal years. The reason for the last is you want to protect your musculoskeletal system. And you can see that in populations where protein is not consumed enough. And it's not just protein, it's also exercise to build that muscle and to maintain that muscle. But if you don't eat enough protein, and obviously you need to digest and use that protein, but if you don't start out by giving the body enough protein, it's not going to be able to support the demand of that musculoskeletal system. The second thing is reduce sugar. And this is a tough one. I know we've just passed Chinese New Year and everybody's kind of smiling and thinking about sugar, but it is one of the most addictive compounds that's out there. It's way too freely available. If we start listing the impact of sugar on the body, we'll be here all evening because it affects everything. So if I just go back to my original, this is kind of the framework I use. If you don't eat enough protein, for example, you don't build the immune system to sort out your microbiome. You don't build the mood markers because everything requires protein. It needs amino acids to work. Sorry. You can't detoxify without enough protein. So one of the things that a lot of people are not aware of, especially somebody who's on a strict vegetarian diet where you may or may not get enough protein depending on how well it's designed. Vegetables are great and everybody thinks of vegetables for detoxification, but the actual process of detoxification does go through a stage that needs amino acids. So protein is super important. Coming back to sugar, sugar will absolutely, encourage the growth of organisms in the gut that shouldn't be there. We run a urine test as well as a stool test, both of which can be used to identify your microbiome. And we often see that, I see that more in this climate, people tend to have an overgrowth of yeast, which is one of the most common pathogens that I pick up on in the test that I do, and not enough probiotics. Sugar will definitely harm this system. Sugar will harm your stress system. Sugar will harm your neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, which is all about the reward system of the brain. Sugar obviously triggers that really, really strongly. So once you start eating sugar, you want more of that reward. It absolutely affects energy because it affects blood sugar levels, which affects energy. And it's just, because it feeds all of this, the body produces a lot more toxins that need to be cleared by the liver. So that one ingredient can impact all these systems in one go. The third bit is, so these two, I think most people recognize that when they eat sugar, especially if it looks something like this with all these colors added to it, that they're not eating something that's great for them. Where I find most people are less aware is the fact that even the rice, the pasta, the noodles, the bread, even if it's whole grain, the best quality bread, the best quality pasta and noodles, handmade noodles, it all gets converted into sugar in the body. Doesn't mean we don't eat it at all. It's just being aware that that is what is also, if you eat out, that is what is served to you as the largest portion on your plate. Just think about what you had for lunch today. And if you've eaten a typical diet, a typical Asian diet or even a typical Western diet, chances are you've had a large bowl of noodles or a large portion of rice with a small portion of protein, definitely not enough vegetables, because this is what is comforting. It is affordable. It is quick. It is easy to put together. I'll accept that, right? So it is, but it's to me, one of the things that matters a lot, because this is the thing that comes in every day. Your dessert might come in once a week, once a month, but the protein and the carbohydrates are part of your daily diet. And so I think it's really important to address that on your plate. A couple of other tips here. One is if you want to calculate how much protein you need, if you know your weight in kilos, you multiply that by 1.2. That will be the amount of grams of protein you need a day. 1.2 assumes that you're somewhat active, not an athlete, but you're active. The more active you are, the higher your protein needs are. And so for many people, that lands at 60, 70, 80 grams of protein a day, right? And just to break down what that might look like, one egg is 6 grams of protein. A 4-ounce piece of fish or chicken is about 18 to 20 grams of protein. A bowl of lentils is about 10 grams of protein. But if you're not getting a good 15 to 20 grams of protein per meal, then you're probably not making up what you need. A lot of people are scared of protein. Will it hurt my kidneys? Unless there's an underlying kidney issue, that is the amount of protein you actually need for basic bodily function. When somebody says you take that to 2 times your weight, okay, that's when, if somebody says to me, I'm consuming 2 times my weight in kilos and protein, my question will be, are you an athlete? Is there a reason for that? That's not something you would do on a day-to-day basis, right? But the 1.2 is a very safe number for most people. Before I move on, does anybody have any burning questions about food? Because I know this brings up a lot of just day-to-day questions. So if you do, please unmute yourself and let's take a pause and I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I'll continue. I've got a couple of questions. Somebody's asked if going on a sugar-free diet is a good idea. And does gluten-free noodles have the same impact on sugar? Absolutely. Gluten-free noodles do generally have the same impact. Of course, it depends on what are the ingredients. Having said that, I do use something called the Freestyle Libre, which is a continuous blood sugar monitor for several of my clients who are either curious to find out how their blood sugar looks over a 2-week period, or if they have pre-diabetes, diabetes. I have found that for many people, a bowl of rice or half a bowl of rice or quinoa does not impact the sugar as much as bread does. So bread and gluten. So for some people, if they have a gluten reactivity and gluten is causing inflammation in the body, then that might cause, it's like an added burden on the body, which might spike up blood sugar levels. But the one thing to know is your blood sugar, your relationship with blood sugar for your food is very personal. I have some people who react to tomatoes, and I'm not saying don't eat tomatoes. I have some people who are able to take a fair bit of carbs because their body is designed that way and because they're active. So it is really interesting and useful to try something like that, to try it as an experiment and say, okay, for 2 weeks, I'm going to track my blood sugar with the way I'm eating, and then I'll start making some changes and then see what happens. And so I do that for a lot of my clients. Somebody's asking a question about the calculation for protein. It's 1.2. So you take your weight in kilos and you multiply that by 1.2, and that number in grams is the amount of protein you need a day. Okay. I'll just talk a little bit about the cycle and how your body changes in the cycle. So obviously for women who are postmenopausal, this is not relevant, but for the rest, this is very relevant. If you start with day 1, which is your period, and you think if you just divide that into half, right? So you go from 1 to 14 and 14 to 28. And very few people have this exact, but this is just a rough guide. The first half of your cycle is when your body is really ready to take on a lot. This is when you can do intermittent fasting. I have some women doing up to 20 hours of fasting. This is when you can do strength training. This is when you need to eat that extra protein. Your body is in a building stage, and that's logical because the body is thinking it needs to be ready for pregnancy. So it is going to build. This is when it's building resources and it's strengthening up. Ovulation happens approximately day 14, although it can vary. This is when the body is thinking it may or may not be pregnant. So this is when it's really more about restoration. So this is where you want to really be aware of the nervous system. You want to lower cortisol. You want to do things that feel more just calming, restorative, focus on sleep, exercise. So this is when you do strength training. This is when you do Pilates and yoga. This is when you do breath work. This is when you push your body. So this is super useful because I have a few clients who've gone on the keto diet or who've done fasting, typically because their husbands are doing it and it's working for them. And they come to me and they say, number one, I don't feel great. I have gained weight. Number two, my period has disappeared. And that's because they've done the same thing every day without respecting that there's a massive difference between the male and the female body, and the big difference is our cycle. So this is really about a lifestyle and diet that is respecting that cycle and working with that cycle. Okay. Speaking of how do you support the adrenals, how do you restore? This is just a list, right? Just a checklist for you to just take a note of and maybe start adding some of these things. We think of stress management in three categories. One is relaxation, the second is restoration, and the third is hormesis. Relaxation is simply, as it sounds, it's the not doing. And you'll be surprised at how difficult this is for people. It is really hard for people who are wired to slow down. And this is all about slowing down. So it's about catching your breath. It's about going for a walk. It's about having a nap. It's about also just getting enough sleep, because that's important here. Restoration is a deliberate activity that forces your body to go from the fight or flight. We have what's called the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight nervous system, and the parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest. We need to spend a fair chunk of time in the parasympathetic nervous system, but we're doing it the wrong way around. We're spending way more time in the sympathetic dominant nervous system. This is all about getting the body to get into that parasympathetic nervous system. Meditation, journaling. I like Headspace. It's easy. I also like box breathing, which is a really simple form of breathing. Walking in nature, just slowing down, but in a more deliberate fashion than relaxation. And there's a space for all three. The third is hormesis, which is actually good. I think you're going to hear the word hormesis a lot more. It's gaining a lot of popularity. And I think that also comes from a more male-dominated space, where this is all about this is not about restoration. This is more about how do I push the body so that it's kind of the pain will give me gain thinking. This is where before anybody starts talking to me about cold plunge therapy, long fasting, I have somebody who was doing F45 twice a day. Hormones were a mess. This is something women need to be very careful about. Now, women in menopause can do this. There isn't the same sensitivity, right? We're able to do this. But a woman who is ovulating, who's having her period, needs to be very aware that this is done according to the cycle, and that the body is not burnt out right at the start. Because if the body's burnt out, imagine the body burnt out right at the start, and then you plunge it in freezing water and you do resistance training. It's this whole idea of the more I do, the better things are going to be. It can completely burn you out, right? And that's when periods just disappear, or they get really irregular and other things happen. I was listening to a podcast today, and somebody was talking about the power of sighing. This was published in a journal called Cell, which is it's a very prestigious journal. And the research was fascinating. They got three groups of people. One group just sighed, literally breath in, breath out, like a big sigh. The second one did meditation, and the third one did something else that was in the space of movement and meditation. And they actually found that the group that just sighed, so just took breath in and breath out, had the biggest change in relaxation. So this doesn't need to be complicated. It is as simple as catching your breath, right? And just doing it. I think it's the power of doing things on a regular basis, rather than saying, I'm going to wait for the weekend and I'm going to do a 2-hour walk and then I'm going to do 1 hour of meditation. You don't need to do that. Think of what you can do in 5 minutes in the day. So at TNC, we call it snacks. What can you do as stress management snacks? Because you don't need to wait for the banquet. You just do little snacks in the day that don't add up to much time. Anybody can fit that in, right? So my practice is between appointments, I do some box breathing. But after hearing today's talk, I might try some sighing from tomorrow, because that sounds much easier and quicker. Another thing to do to support your adrenals is to get sleep. Singapore has, globally, I think we're number 2 when it comes to the worst sleep. And I see that. Almost everybody I work with is struggling to either fall asleep or stay asleep. Sleep naturally has a lot to do with your nervous system. Surprisingly, for many people, it also has to do with your digestive system. If you have any issues with digestion, that activity tends to happen at night. And what I find is if you wake up between 3 and 5, it's likely to be a digestive issue that's waking you up, even though you're not necessarily connecting that dot. I've had some people wake up because they consume a food sensitivity, and that creates enough inflammation in the body to wake you up. But the most common issue is just being wired and tired. You're exhausted, but you're not able to switch off, right? But a few tips that you can use starting today, tonight. Bedroom should be cool, quiet, and dark, really like a cave. Even a little sliver of light can affect melatonin production. This is, and I have to confess, this is tough for me to do as well. The digital distractions 45 minutes before sleep is really, really important because the blue light does affect melatonin production. But even if you can get that 15-20 minute, just no devices before sleeping, it definitely makes a difference. No caffeine after 2. Setting a wind down routine. So just switching off from everything, allowing your body to sleep. Anybody who has a bathtub in their house, you can try Epsom salt soaks. So just take a cup of Epsom salts, which you can get at any pharmacy, put it in a warm bath and soak for 15 to 20 minutes. And that really helps. Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate. The magnesium gets absorbed through your skin, and that's really calming. Obviously, having a bath is calming in itself. And the sulfate in Epsom salts also help you detoxify. So that's a really nice habit. Don't go to bed too hungry. Don't go to bed too full. You need to have a gap of 4 hours. Try to sleep by 11. And for anybody who's not sleeping well and exercising in the evening, try shifting your exercise time to earlier in the day. So you're doing anything that is stimulating, getting your body to do more. You want to move all those activities to earlier in the day. Okay, so that's my content for today's talk, and I'll be answering questions soon. But also to let you know that next week, Wednesday, 8 o'clock, we'll be talking about all the different popular diets. So there's OMAD, which is 1 meal a day, keto, which is high fat, very low carbs, paleo, which is also called the caveman diet, and vegan, which is, or plant-based, which is without any animal products. So I'll be looking at each one of these and giving my opinion on, is it a good idea? Is it not? And if you choose to do it, I'm a big believer in experimenting. It's important to try what works for you. If you do choose to do it, what are some of the things you need to be aware of? Right. And if you have any questions, of course, now is the time we'll go through what I have, and please add them to the meeting chat. But if you'd like a more private conversation, then reach out to us. You can use this link. You can book a 10-minute inquiry call, and we'll be happy to answer questions. If you'd like to know more about the process we use and whether it's the right fit for you, I'll be happy to help you with that as well. I'm going to leave this up while I go through the questions that have come through to me. If you just give me a minute, I'll just access those. Okay, so we've got some on the chat. Somebody wants to know if the recording will be available. Absolutely, we will be putting this on our YouTube channel. A couple of people have asked that. Sugar-free. Somebody asked about how many carbs we should take, and that's a really good question. And there isn't a single answer because it does depend on your activity level. It depends on your blood sugar levels. Also depends on whether there is an underlying insulin issue. So if somebody has PCOS or a very strong family history of diabetes, and I take that into account. I also take into account blood type. So there isn't a single answer for that. But if I had to give kind of general numbers, so the keto diet tends to be 0 to 50. That tends to be definitely on the lower end. I think for most people, a sweet spot is between 50 and 80. Anything above 100 or 150 will interfere with energy, weight gain, and the rest. So, let's say 50 to 80 or 50 to 100, if you're more active, is grams of carbs a day. The number of carbs obviously matter. The quality matters. If you're eating the same carbs in white sugar versus a sweet potato, it's very different in the body. And the timing matters as well. So eating a little bit of your carbs at night can help you sleep just because they make you sleepy. Eating carbs in the middle of the day for most people will just make them too sleepy to get on with what they need to do. So timing, it makes a difference as well. Somebody's asked a question about protein content because of cholesterol. There are a lot of lean protein options. And just a little word about cholesterol. Obviously, cholesterol is linked to the diet. It's also linked to a number of other things. And I'm going to go back to this picture. Sorry, I'm going to go backwards. This is going to be faster. If I go back to here and I just walk you through how I look at cholesterol, there is a family history. There's definitely family history matters, diet matters. But the other things that matter when it comes to cholesterol to keep in mind is cholesterol is effectively a substance that's produced in order to repair. It is a repair substance. And when cholesterol goes up, one of the things we have to think about is what triggered that. If it's simply diet, then obviously that can be adjusted. But if it's not that, then it can be stress, because if there is additional stress on the body, and stress is something, I think a lot of people are now very aware that stress is a big issue. But when we experience stress, we have to remember that the body is still wired like a caveman or cavewoman. And a caveman or cavewoman's body in response to stress was really, am I going to survive? It's the fight-flight response. Do I get chased by an animal or do I chase an animal? And that was really the stress that the body is designed to even today handle. Today's life doesn't have those. We have enough food and we're not typically chased by an animal. But that ongoing stress triggers the same hormones, the same issues that our ancestors had to deal with in the jungle. Now, the body is actually super intelligent. We've got to really respect the mechanism over here. The body's thinking is, if it is unsafe, if I might get attacked, if survival is at stake, I need to produce enough repair molecules. Because if I get injured, if there's bleeding, I need to be able to patch up quickly. So whenever there is an increase in cholesterol, we have to also look at stress. And I think everybody looks at diet, and I'm not dismissing that, but I don't think we can just look at diet alone. We have to look at stress, both in terms of emotional stress, which typically sits here, but also physiological stress, which can be what's going on in the gut. Are you detoxifying well? Are you exposed to toxins? All of that will impact cholesterol. And I think we kind of live in this world where everything is cut into little blocks, and cholesterol only has to do with food, and it only has to do with animal protein. I wish it were that simple. It often is not that simple. Right. So I think I've answered most of the questions on this. Somebody was saying that they're not able to sleep more than 5 hours of the day. And yes, you're right. Sleep is different for everybody. I agree with that. So we say 7 to 8 hours as an average. The work I really do is, I call it personalized wellness or precision wellness. The whole idea when I'm working with the client is I'm working with the individual. So if somebody has slept 5 hours and that's working well and it's not showing up as a problem, we don't need to turn it into a problem, right? Because there will always be averages for the population, but what we're all interested in is me. How do I optimize my health? What are my needs? And I'll give you another example. One of the tests we do looks at your folic acid needs or B vitamin needs. And there are different numbers for different people because genetically some people need more B vitamins than others. And the recommended daily allowance is an average starting number, but for optimization, some people need more. So I completely agree with you. If 5 hours is working for you, there's no reason to question that. All right, let me just go back to these questions. Somebody has asked me a question about yeast infections. Yeast infections, definitely. I do a lot of work with yeast overgrowth. It can be hormonal or it can be triggered through hormonal shift. But yeast infections, it's really around your digestive system. A lot of women have vaginal yeast infections, but the source is still gut health. And so we typically find that women who have recurring yeast infections have an imbalance of flora in the gut. They don't have enough of the good microbes, and they have an overgrowth of yeast in the gut. This organism called yeast also loves sugar. So you see where sugar comes in. It also gets affected by sleep. So if you're not sleeping well, that can impact this pathogen. And whatever it produces also puts a lot of burden on your detoxification system. So you can see how all of this that's interconnected. So a lot of women who have a yeast issue also have eczema or psoriasis because of this connection. I've had somebody ask a question of whether somebody who's in their 40s dealing with a thyroid issue, and can we stabilize hormones to maintain the thyroid and move into a smooth menopause? I would say it's really important to address the underlying issues behind the thyroid before you go into menopause. The thyroid is very much, I've never worked with anybody who has a thyroid issue who also doesn't have a stress issue. Think of them as hormone cousins. They kind of work together, or they're impacted by each other. And the way I like to think about the body changing during perimenopause is, imagine the operating system of the female body has gone from, the reproductive system being more in charge to the nervous system being more in charge. Now, if you don't address what's happening in the nervous system, there is the risk that puts a greater burden on the thyroid. So absolutely, one has to look at this before menopause. That's the best time to really address the thyroid. Somebody asked which foods help to get hormonal balance and which foods create hormonal imbalance. Again, there isn't a magic list of foods, but I can tell you a few things. As I said, we want to look at sugar, carbohydrates. We want to look at protein. You want to get lots of phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are basically plant-based foods. So most people don't eat enough vegetables. We really need 5 to 7 servings of vegetables. It can be in any form that works for you. Smoothies are a great way. Soups are a great way to get vegetables in. And I know it sounds like something you've heard a lot of. Everybody's heard eat more vegetables, but it is really important to get those phytonutrients. Now, some people who have very severe digestive issues cannot digest that much vegetables. So if you're dealing with a gut-related issues, if you're bloated, if you have reflux, don't go from 0 to 100 and just you do it step by step, and you start choosing, literally start with the basic vegetables, which are leafy greens or the root vegetables. Those are the easiest on the digestive system. Don't do salads, do cooked vegetables, and slowly take it up. Anything that is highly processed, lots of sugar, lots of chemicals, is going to mess up the hormonal system, sorry. That's really a starting list. Then we can get more detailed into superfoods like the cruciferous vegetables for estrogen dominance, or prebiotic foods to help feed the microbiome, or fermented foods to help feed the microbiome, which is at, I think, level 2 after the basics are done. I got a question about digestion and skin mood, especially around ovulation. Digestion and skin, for me, they go completely hand in hand. So the moment somebody comes in with eczema or acne, my first question is, how is your digestive system? Because that's really what matters to me first. So the fact that there is this connection that you've made, that there is an issue with digestion and skin, makes a lot of sense. So absolutely, that can be dealt with. Somebody's asked a question about how to delay menopause. There is a certain kind of, I guess, circuitry in place based on genetics. I don't see it as delaying it. There is a natural, you just don't want to have it too early. And one of the things to be aware of is, again, stress, because that will definitely affect your hormonal balance and can lead to earlier menopause, I would say. Somebody asked a question about fasting and menopause, and I have answered that in what I said earlier with the period chart. But if you have more questions, just reach out and I'll be happy to help you. How can we boost our melatonin production without taking supplements? That's a fantastic question. So melatonin is a sleep hormone, and it is produced at the end of the day. And let me see if I have a slide in this deck that might help. Not in this. Okay, if you give me a minute, I will look for one. You know what, maybe I'll do a separate, let me just send a separate note to everybody about that. I don't want to use up the time for people who are not necessarily interested in this topic. But one of the tests we run is a salivary cortisol test. It's measuring a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol needs to be quite high in the morning. Sorry, it's just extra slides that I had kept for questions. Let me just go back to this in case anybody needs this. Cortisol is a hormone that needs to be quite high in the morning and low at night. And so the graph of cortisol really is up and then a slide down. And that's something we do for most of the clients who see us. Now, if anybody has low cortisol in the morning, energy is going to be affected. But if somebody has high cortisol at night, sleep is going to be affected. So the first thing I do when we look at that is look at what's causing this cortisol issue. So that's the best way for your body to produce melatonin naturally, is to have a steady cortisol level the way it's intended to be. The second thing that can affect melatonin production is something called serotonin. Serotonin is a mood chemical. It's considered our happy chemical. Serotonin is produced largely in the gut by your probiotics. So having enough probiotics will help you produce enough serotonin. Having enough B6 and B12, which is chronically low in the people I work with, will help you produce enough serotonin. Once you produce enough serotonin, that can get converted to melatonin. So those are two strategies for producing melatonin naturally. Somebody's asking me if somebody has not had any skin issues like eczema or acne, can they suddenly develop it in their 30s? Absolutely. It's actually very common. Most people think that eczema has to be a kind of an early childhood issue and then it's resolved. And for many people, that's the case. For many people, it comes back. And for many people, it just starts in their 30s. And that's the reason for that is because something has shifted. Typically, what's shifted is the gut microbiome. So if that's happened, ask yourself, what was happening in my life around that time? Had I taken antibiotics? Had I taken a lot of painkillers? Had I fallen sick? Was it a particularly stressful period? There is some clue there in your lifestyle or in your journey that has led to that. And this person said it started in her 30s. If something's happened in your 30s, it didn't necessarily start that month. It might have been 2 to 5 years in the making, maybe even 10 years in the making. So just look back and say, was there something that was changing in my lifestyle? Was I eating more sugar? Did I change my diet? Did I change to one of these diets that we're going to discuss next week? Did I go vegan or did I go paleo? There's something that's shifted things for you. And the work I do is really like that of that detective to see, okay, what has shifted and what can we do about it? But it's always a good idea to reflect on what that might be for yourself. I have a question about somebody who's saying they're not gaining weight because they have sensitivities and gastric issue. In all likelihood, you're not digesting and absorbing well. And many people find this hard to believe, but gaining weight if you're underweight is harder than losing weight because it means you have to digest, absorb, and use, which is actually, the body needs to be really ready to do that. And for many people, if they have a condition called leaky gut, which is also known as intestinal permeability, the whole process of absorption is really challenging. And so that would be the focus for somebody who's dealing with that. A couple more questions have come through. As somebody says, I'm 53 and no period for 5 years. Yes, I'm going to assume that's menopause. Always a good idea to see a doctor and get the medical checkups done. So I'm not a doctor. The work I do doesn't come under mainstream medicine. My work is under complementary medicine or nutritional lifestyle medicine. But I always like clients who are dealing with something big like that to go see a doctor, get those tests done, and then come to me with that information, because I can also use that information in the strategies that I have. There's an incredible comment about somebody saying that they drink 1 kilo of mixed vegetables a day, cold pressed for her and for her 98-year-old mom. That's fantastic. I think that's great. I think it's fantastic that you're doing that. Somebody said that last year they had massive weight gain. Hormone panel came back with elevated LH. Yes, if you're looking for, and you're kind of wondering if there's a thyroid issue, you want to make sure you're getting a very comprehensive look at the thyroid. And what I'd recommend you do is if you can just book a 10-minute call with me, I'll be happy to just walk you through some of the tests you want to ask your doctor to do, just so that it's a complete look at the thyroid. And that might just help clear whether the thyroid is behind this weight gain. Somebody's been on antibiotics for some time. What can I do to improve my microbiome? That's a great question. And obviously, a lot of people need to take antibiotics. A couple of things. When you take the antibiotic and right after, for about a month to 2 months, depending on how long the antibiotics have been for, you want to get on a high strength, like 60 billion organisms in a capsule form, right? That's just, you just go for that to top up and make sure that you're not shifting your microbiome in a negative way. Some people stay on probiotics and a capsule probiotics for the longer term. Some people are able to manage with fermented foods and some probiotics. And I work with different strategies based on where a person is at and also how much they're able to do. So when you're on antibiotics or soon after antibiotics, you definitely need to take probiotics. After that, you can look at phasing that down and look at some fermented foods. 4 servings of fermented foods. So that's either kimchi, kefir, kombucha, fermented garlic. 4 servings a day can actually be quite powerful, but that's not always easy for people to source and digest and absorb. So if you're not able to do that, then we keep you on longer capsule probiotics. When you're buying probiotics, you need to be aware. Make sure you're reading how many million or billion organisms. It has to be in the billion. If you're on antibiotics, the million's not going to cut it. You want to be at least 60 billion. You want to have a blend that has a number of different organisms. Most of them will be lactobacillus or bifidobacteria. You want a variety of organisms. You want to also be sure that they've been stored correctly. These are live organisms. If they're not stored correctly, you may just be consuming a capsule that doesn't have what's on the packaging. So the probiotics we bring them in refrigerated. We keep them refrigerated because we want to make sure that we're delivering something that's of the same level as what's on the package. So just be really aware of that. Same with foods that have probiotics. If they're not stored properly, those organisms may die. And so then you may not be getting what's promised. Foods to increase progesterone. I'll be honest, that's not the easiest one. Increasing progesterone is harder than just balancing out estrogen. There are, as with all hormones, they are linked to overall sleep and stress and diet and everything else we've covered. So that would be the strategy I use rather than specific foods for progesterone. There isn't something that I've come across that's actually powerful enough to do that. My thoughts on HRT. So I believe in sticking to my lane, and I'm not a doctor, so I would not like to comment on anything that is in the medical space because I don't think that's fair. That's not my training, and I don't think it's fair for me to give an opinion on that. So HRT is being used. It's out there. There are different opinions on it, but that's not my training, so I'm not going to be able to share any thoughts on that, if that's okay. Any other questions? I think I've answered most of them. If anybody wants to just turn on the sound, unmute themselves and ask, that's perfectly fine as well. No? Oh, I see one more message. How do you maintain hormonal health during menopause? It's a combination of factors. There is the during and then there's the post, and I think both need to be treated similarly, but there are some differences. During menopause, there is a lot more the up and down that happens due to estrogen levels changing. And I think we go back to the foundation, which is the food, the gut, sleep, stress, making sure you're not deficient, making sure, I would say if there's one thing that from a system point of view, and this has been recognized by mainstream medicine as well as every other form of medicine, is that all illness and all disease starts in the gut, right? So you want to make sure gut health it takes primary stage. So that would be the one thing that I would say. To deal with hormonal health, you have to look at gut health. All right. Thank you very much, Miriam. Really enjoyed sharing this information with you. And I look forward to seeing some of you at least next week, where we look at some of the common diets. And if you have any questions for that session, please feel free to email us. We'll obviously be sending the information on email as well as on our social media. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next week.